welcome back. You got two 1/2 inch bolts that come off. That's going to release the side cover and the Show you how to get the new fuel lines in. So once you cut a fuel line, it's got a flat tip and it makes it kind of hard to get into the tank. So what I like to do is take a pair of scissors or a knife, and we're going to cut a sharp point on the end of the fuel line. Then back out of the tank, through the carburetor, back out of the carburetor, into the primer bulb, out from the primer bulb, and into the tank again. Okay, now I'll set this to the side and we're going to clean this carburetor out. So you got a Phillips head bolt, pull this cover off. You've got typically a plastic gasket, some of them look like felt, and you've got a rubber gasket underneath that. Now the other side, you've also got Phillips head bolts. Sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's 4. So go ahead and pull those off, and I'll show you the next part of this carburetor, which is a diaphragm gasket. Now your diaphragm gasket, you want to check, because sometimes they get stiff, and if they get stiff, you might as well throw it away and get one. If you can't find a good deal on a diaphragm gasket, you can just buy a new carburetor for probably $10 to $15. But on a lot of those Chinese-made carburetors that are aftermarket, you still have to tune them, so keep that in mind. This one's got a little stiffness, but it's not bad, so we'll go ahead and leave that. Once some fuel gets to it, it'll soften up. I usually leave the diaphragm gasket on because a lot of times it tears and sticks to the carburetor, and if you don't want to buy any parts for your carburetor, you're just trying to clean it, it's better to not remove it. So you got a Phillips head bolt that holds the your needle and seat. So go ahead and pull the needle off. And you can usually do that with the gasket on. Don't lose your spring. I don't know if you can see that there's a little tiny spring in here. If you're not paying attention, it'll fly away. So pull your needle out, and right away I can see the needle's got a lot of debris on it. Don't know if you can see this, but it's basically black on the tip. And you wipe it down a little bit, and you'll see that it's orange or red. And there we go. So if that needle's black, chances are it's got a slight clog. Some needle tips are black, but just go ahead and clean it to be sure. Most of them are red. Next up, I've got a little filter on the bottom side of the carburetor. It's just a little metal screen. You basically just want to pry it out. Now you really want to check this. Now what you need to know on this is that when you pull it out, you want it to be flexible. If it's hard and it just wants to kind of fall apart, then you need to throw it out and get another one. When they get stiff, that means they're clogged. It won't draw any fuel. So this one looks good. We can reuse it. Okay, now I use carburetor cleaner. Go ahead and rinse off the carburetor just a little bit. There is one more part that I'm going to pull off of this before we really get into cleaning it. And make sure the vacuum ports are clean. And we'll go ahead and spray every jet that we can see. Now, this one has got flathead screws, so you get lucky if you got flatheads. If not, you've got to get yourself carburetor adjustment tools, which are pretty cheap on Amazon. Just go ahead and buy the 4-pack. It'll have just about every one you need to work on anything with a 2-cycle carburetor. That's your high and low jet. They're usually distinguished with an L and an H. Some of them just have an L, or some of them just have an H. So what I like to do is pull them off, and I'll set the high towards the top of my work surface, and I'll set the low towards the bottom. That kind of keeps it in my mind high and low. Some of them are different size threads, so some of them you may not have to worry about. So we're going to go ahead and spray those jets out with some carb cleaner. Okay, so after you've sprayed down the carburetor with carbon choke cleaner, that should have loosened up just about everything in it. There are the occasional ones that you just cannot clean out. There's other stuff you can remove on these carburetors if you really want to clean them out, but the cost to do the carburetor kit compared to buying a new carburetor, it is really not worth doing anymore. Carburetors used to be a lot more expensive, now they're not. So I'm going to go ahead and take the blow gun off the air compressor. We'll just go ahead and blow all that out. Now be careful on some of your carburetors on the high and low jets when you're blowing them out. Some of them have rubber gaskets, so you just lightly want to hit them. You don't want to go crazy. Alright, go ahead and set this to the side and start putting it back together. So on these gaskets, I like to just wipe them, and they usually come clean. Sometimes you have to use carbon choke, but I typically don't. The carbon choke cleaner sometimes wants to swell your gaskets. That can be good in some circumstances and not in the others. So I just kind of wipe these down. They don't really get a whole lot of debris on them. Okay. Let's see. Back to this needle. We'll go ahead and make sure this needle's nice and clean. So I usually just wipe it down also. You also want to make sure your screen's nice and clean, and go ahead and set that to the side as well. And your diaphragm is typically going to be clean. Okay. So I'm going to clean the tips of my high and low jets. Just make sure the tips are clean on those. They clog up a carburetor really easy. Okay, so we're going to start out. We'll go ahead and put the needle back in. Now, here's your spring. Be careful with that. I go ahead and set the spring in first. There's a little round hole kind of cut out where it goes. Go ahead and set that in place. It makes it a little easier. I like to go ahead and hook the needle and then I go ahead and set the rod pretty close. Okay, now carefully hold all that together, drop the needle down into the hole, and line up the spring with the notch on the bottom. Hold that in place and put your Phillips head screw back in. Just tightly sliding it, slightly tighten it. You don't have to get too crazy with it. And we'll go ahead and put the screen in the other side. Now you want this to slide right in. Pay attention, because sometimes you'll try to put it in and it'll slip over to the side, and then it makes the filter pretty much pointless. So just be careful when you do that. And the way I'm going to test this, I'm going to spray a little carburetor cleaner on the top where the needle's at. And then I'm going to push on the needle, and you can see that the carburetor cleaner is dripping through the carburetor. That means you're good to go on that. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and set my diaphragm gasket back in and put the cover on that and put the 4 screws back in. Now there should be tabs on your diaphragm. Some of them don't have them, but okay, we'll go ahead and tighten down these 4 screws. Okay, now we're going to flip it over, and we're going to go ahead and put our gaskets back on to the top cover. So the first one on the cover is going to be the rubber gasket. Stick that in place and make sure it lines up to where it was before. You'll get an air leak. And the next one's going to be your plastic or felt gasket. Go ahead and put that on. And I like to go ahead and slide the Phillips bolt in. Now we're going to put this onto the carburetor, and it's good to pull the throttle back just a little bit, and that'll make the top cover seat that in and tighten it down. Now you don't want to over tighten any of these screws because you'll get air leaks, so just snug them. Okay, now if you were afraid to pull these high and low jets, don't be. I'm going to go ahead and tell you where you need to set them as a good starting point. So go ahead and put your high and low jets back in, and go ahead and tighten them all the way down. Don't over tighten them, just tighten them down till they're snug. Okay, now a good starting point with these is 1.5 turns out. So just pay attention to either your screwdriver or the actual jet. You want to do a half turn, another half turn, then another half turn. So you're 1.5 turns out. That's typically a good starting point. New from the factory, that's usually where they're set. So if your carburetor is not in too bad a shape, it should fire right back up at that setting. Sometimes you may have to play with it a little bit after putting it back on, but that's typically right around where you need to at least get it going. Okay, now replacement of the carburetor is going to be the same procedure, just in reverse. So go ahead and put that back on. And now we're going to go ahead and throw the bar and chain back on. Put that on. And make sure again that your brake is pulled back. You don't want to try and put the cover on with your brake set. You'll have a hard time, you'll be fighting it, and you'll probably tear the brake up. So go ahead and put that on, put your 2 1/2-inch bolts back in, and tighten down the bar. I usually make the chain to where you can pull it off the top about a 1/4 inch. And then after I do that, I tighten it just a little more. These chains come loose pretty quick, so I like to get them nice and tight off the bat, and that way when it gets used the first time, as long as the chain will spin and it's not too tight, then it'll stay tight a little longer than if you did not tightened it down like that. So that's just my opinion. Some people like to run them loose. I personally feel like it's dangerous to run it loose. So let's go ahead and try to fire this up and see if we're going to have to adjust this carburetor any. Okay. This appears to be running good. I don't have to adjust the carburetor at all. So this is good to go. I can give the guy a call and let him know his saw is ready. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.